My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. We will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. Prime Minister just left. He's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA. We're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. You think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. 39%. We're going to charge them 20%.
We're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail.
We're going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
Hello and welcome to our special broadcast. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Fear, fury, dilemma, dismay. Countries across the world are coming to grips with Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs, one that appends decades of America's support to globalization and potentially that has the power to disrupt and rearrange global trade. Trump unveiled sweeping reciprocal tariffs. The levies were bigger than expected. Let's quickly take you through the key takeaways. Trump announced what he calls discounted reciprocal tariffs during a long, drawn-out speech at the White House lawn. Several countries, including China, Vietnam, EU, Japan and India, stare at tariffs in the range of 20 to 40%. India specifically faces a 27% tariff levy. As per the Trump administration, the rates were calculated as roughly half of what the US claims these countries impose on American exports. Factoring tariffs, non-monetary barriers, among others. India's Commerce Ministry says they are carefully examining the implications. So what does this mean for the Indian industry? India's pharma sector can breathe easy as Trump's reciprocal tariff strike exempts the sector. IT and jewelry, however, stared at a backlash. We're now joined by Mark Linscott, Senior Advisor at US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, also Apollo Hospital's Managing Director, Suneeta Reddy. She's also the President of the All India Management Association. We're also joined by Moody's Chief Economist, Mark Zandi. Suneeta Reddy, if I can begin with you first. Everything now hinges on the bilateral trade agreement. What's your larger expectation now that these tariffs have kicked in?
I believe that if you look at the holistic picture, the US is solving for $1.2 trillion of trade deficit. And what these tariffs will do is technically give them about $400 billion of saving. But it will put price pressures on the US consumers. So I believe that there is leeway, there is a window of opportunity for countries to really negotiate better terms. In India especially, we had a $46 billion trade surplus. I believe that India is looking at a very strategic route to bring down this tariff surplus slightly. But more importantly, they focused on things that are important for the country. For example, they've negotiated a very good price for LNG and petroleum, and this will benefit all Indians. They've also started to buy military hardware from the US and look at joint development, joint manufacturing of defense hardware. We also believe that it will spur investments in environment-friendly greenhouse, in environment-friendly solar panels, and all these industries that are related to the environment. So it will be give and take. In the long run, India will benefit, is my feeling. Currently, it adds up to about 1.2% of our GDP.
Right. Of course, worrying signs for some businesses, of course. Mark, you have been the assistant USTR in the US administration, the first Trump administration. You know, we read the statement from the US Chambers of Commerce, very strong words about how these tariffs are actually a tax which will raise prices for American consumers and also hurt American businesses. Do you share this view that these reciprocal tariffs will hit back at American businesses itself?
Well, yes. I mean, there's no doubt that that tariffs do impact domestic consumption. They can raise the price of inputs for domestic manufacturers. They certainly can have consequences for consumers, prices going up potentially, inflation more broadly going up. And it really depends on the product and relationships between exporters and importers, and to what extent does an exporter eat the cost? To what extent does it pass it on, or does an importer pass it on to consumers? I mean, those are questions I think they really are sector to sector, but there are likely to be impacts on prices in the United States, and certainly some negative impacts for producers in the United States who depend on inputs from almost anywhere in the world.
Right. Mark, Zandi, if I could ask you about the impact of reciprocal tariffs and where they would leave America. You were speaking about tariffs and the state of the U.S. economy. Where do you think the current tariffs, this level of reciprocal tariffs, is going to take the American economy?
Well, if the reciprocal tariffs are implemented in full, I would expect some retaliation from countries abroad. I don't think they're going to sit on their hands. So the combination of those two things will result in a recession, an economic recession. You know, it's a tax on American consumers. The bulk of the tariff increases will fall on them. Businesses that import product will have to pay more, which will hurt their profitability and thus their investment in hiring. I don't see any global manufacturing firm deciding to move to the U.S. to operate there in significant part because the tariffs are uncertain. Who knows how long they're going to be in place? They could be changed because these are being done under so-called executive order. They're not in law. They can be changed with a stroke of a pen, or the president can change them tomorrow. So, you know, I don't see any benefit to the U.S. economy. I see just nothing but negatives. Now, having said that, you know, we're seeing what's happening in the stock market today. And if I'm right about the economy and the impacts, I do think the president will ultimately react to that and hopefully will pull back and declare victory and move on. And if so, we can avoid an outright recession. But time is running out. He's going to need to pivot here pretty quickly. Otherwise, I think the U.S. economy is going to go into recession and take the entire global economy with it.
Right. That indeed is an important point. Mark, do you believe that Trump right now has an exit strategy? Because in India, the feeling is, and many experts through the day have been saying, that what Trump has done with these reciprocal tariffs is not sustainable. Do you think there is an exit strategy at place in the White House as well?
Well, I don't know that there's a comprehensive exit strategy. And in fact, I think the president has been quite clear that some level of tariffs will be permanent. I mean, he is a strong believer in tariffs. There's no doubt about that. What I do think may happen, I think there is the opportunity for negotiation. And that's where I've had experience, and my area of expertise is in negotiation. I think that that individual countries will be having discussions with the administration, and specifically with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, my former agency. We know that, in fact, there have been quite active talks already between the United States and India, between Jameson Greer, who is the U.S. Trade Minister effectively. He's the U.S. Trade Representative, and Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce. A team led by USTR was in Delhi last week. I think they made tremendous progress. I understand that India has hinted at the possibility of lowering its tariffs in unprecedented ways. And I think it's the negotiations with individual countries that may lead to some lowering of these reciprocal tariffs, setting aside what the other Mark referenced, which is the potential for recession and the reactions from markets, and whether there might be a pullback in response to those developments.
Mark, you know, there was a feeling in India, though, that in the run-up to these reciprocal tariffs, considering the positive momentum in the bilateral trade negotiations, there would be a reprieve or a pause on tariffs for India. Mark Linscott, why do you think that pause has not happened? And what will it take for the US to say, stop, we're not going to impose any tariffs on India till the time the BTA is signed?
Yeah, well, the ambition in a matter of weeks and even days was quite high and perhaps unrealistic for any negotiation. Essentially, I think the expectation on the U.S. side was that India would drop its tariffs for the United States. These are not cuts anticipated to be non-discriminatory for the benefit of everyone. It would be cuts for the United States, essentially across the board, and certainly for all U.S. priorities, and moving the simple average tariff rate of India down to roughly equate with the U.S. rate, which as a simple average is in the range of 3.4%. So that's a lot to bite off for a negotiation. And I just don't think there was enough information available, enough specific offers, concessions on the table to get to that point of, sure, we've got a tariff deal now, and there can be a reprieve for India. That said, though, I think there's tremendous potential. I certainly hope there's potential for an agreement in the near future, perhaps an interim agreement, perhaps an early harvest agreement as part of the larger bilateral trade agreement, the BTA, that could lead to action specifically for India on tariffs.
Right. Perhaps that is what India is hoping for, because the Commerce Ministry statement said that they are still talking to the Trump administration and continue to do so. Suneeta, Reddy, if I could come to you, the medical device sector is going to be impacted. In 23-24, India's medical device exports to US stood at around $714 million US dollars. How do you think healthcare companies in India, including Apollo hospitals, will recalibrate their US strategy?
So we do export 700 million and we import $1.5 billion worth of medical consumables. So this is just medical consumables. But I have to say that the duty we impose on medical equipment is very high. It's at 36%. So as the Indian government looks at recalibrating customs duties and tariffs, our hope is that they will look at recalibrating this medical equipment, which is life-saving. And while they're looking at consumables, also think of medical equipment. We should be grateful that in the pharmacy space, pharmaceuticals, we have been protected. Indian pharmaceuticals, as you must know, provide 47% of the generics and save Americans over $250 billion. So I think there's an opportunity to negotiate, hopefully bring down tariffs on medical equipment. And Trump's called out Indian standards. He said that when we export, we have to follow Indian quality standards. I think when India follows American quality standards, it's only fair that we come at a standard that is applicable for both countries. But the total impact...
We're taking a short break. Right. We're taking a short break, Suneeta, Reddy. We'll be right back. I'll request Mark Linscott and Mark Zandi to also continue being with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special broadcast. I'm still joined by Mark Linscott, Senior Advisor at USISPF, Mark Zandi of Moody's, and Suneeta Reddy, MD at Apollo Hospitals. Let me go across to Mark Zandi now. Mark, if we look at India's major exports to the United States, you've got electrical machinery, you've got jewelry, pharma, you've got minerals as well. Give us a sense of how these tariffs are going to impact the Indian economy. You've been doing a study of different regions, including Asia Pacific. Specifically, the big impact that you see on India as a result. In the run-up to these tariffs, it was being speculated that a 20% or 26% tariff could really wipe off or impact 0.7% of India's GDP. What would be your view?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I don't think any country in the world is going to get through this without some significant hit to economic growth. These tariffs are quite substantive, and if the president follows through, and it increasingly feels like he's committed to these tariffs. He's looking at them as a source of revenue that he can use to help offset the cost of other tax cuts. So he seems very enamored with the tariffs and going to follow through. And I understand there'll be negotiations, but I think all you have to do is go back to the negotiations that occurred in his first term as president with China. They really didn't. There was a lot of negotiation. There was a signing, but at the end of the day, it really didn't change anything. I suspect in many cases that'll be what happens here as well, and that there will be economic damage. So I'd buckle up. I think I don't think there's any easy way out of this. I think we're going to go through a period of much weaker economic growth. Some countries are going to navigate through better than others. India's got a lot of it's a resilient economy. It's got a lot going for it, and I think should be able to weather the storm reasonably well. But I think there's no doubt that there's going to be a storm here that everyone's going to have to grapple with.
Right. Give us your sense. You've also spoken on different channels yesterday ahead of the tariffs, and you said that Trump would definitely, he's a businessman, he knows that the markets have been hit badly, and somewhere he will look at an exit strategy. What could that be, and at what point? Because as we were discussing earlier, the US Chambers of Commerce, even before the tariffs kicked in, said that these tariffs will negatively impact American consumers and businesses, especially small businesses. At what point will Trump pull back?
I'm not sure. I had been on the mind. I go back to the tariff war, the trade war under his first term, and when the economy started to go south and the stock market was down and looked like things were going in the wrong direction, he pivoted. He cut a deal with China, which is who we were most at loggerheads with, and moved on. And I expected that to be the way things would work out this go around. But I at this point, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if you listen to him in the Rose Garden yesterday, he's pretty committed to this. And he said, look, this is Liberation Day. He's made a big deal out of it. I don't know there's an exit strategy here. I just don't see it. So, I do think it's much more likely now that we're going to see higher tariffs. Now, is he going to impose the tariffs that he presented yesterday? They're very high. 54% on China. I think it's better than 26% on India. Those are very, very aggressive increases in tariffs. So is he going to do that? Maybe not. But I suspect that we are going to see much higher tariffs, and I don't know that any negotiation is going to bring them down to a place anyone's going to feel comfortable with. So I'm not sure there's an exit strategy here.
Right. Suneeta Reddy, coming to you, what do you think is India's position currently? It is being said that the tariffs on India, and as Mark Zandi said, it's aggressively high. 26% is definitely not a discounted rate, and all these tariffs have been arrived at using a formula. So there has been no exception for India. Considering the tariffs on Vietnam, Thailand, China are much higher, is there a window of opportunity? And what do we now need to do for the next 4 years to 10 years in order to be a global supplier? There is a lot more effort that India will have to put in.
You're absolutely right. I think if you look at the tariffs that are imposed on the Southeast Asian countries, US, especially Taiwan and Vietnam, there probably isn't opportunity for Indian manufacturers to really step up, because the cost of producing in India would be low. The arbitrage on tariff from 27 to 54 is huge. So I'm sure that it should strengthen our Make in India program. It should strengthen our MSMEs, who will be really hurt with this current tariff. I'm sure that this is definitely an opportunity for India. We've seen how they've exempted pharmaceuticals because it played such a vital role in healthcare for the US. In the same fashion, I believe that even in medical consumables, India has a great opportunity ahead of us.
Right. Mark, Zandi, coming to you, what about the shift in trade patterns and trading relationships? Do you think India is going to be a gainer? Is China going to be a gainer here? Who will gain in this crisis and who will be the biggest loser? Where do you think India is going to get impacted as the trading relationships get realigned?
Well, certainly in the near term, we all lose. I don't think there's any winner here. The U.S. loses, India loses, China loses. We all lose. I think recession is increasingly likely. In the longer run, I think this will change investment patterns, supply chain investment decisions, and where people are going to expand and locate. And I can't imagine that this is going to benefit the United States. Even if President Trump tomorrow decided, okay, forget about this, this is just a bad dream. No, we're not going to raise tariffs. The damage has been done. I mean, the trust that has been built up over decades between countries and the U.S. has been significantly hurt by this. I don't know that it can be repaired. Certainly not repaired anytime soon. And that means that's going to affect, where global businesses decide to locate and expand. I hear this argument that, well, look, this is a reason why global manufacturers should locate in the United States. These tariffs, will protect them. But these tariffs are by executive order. They're here today, they're gone tomorrow. And the CEO of a major company is not, when they're thinking about it, making an investment plan, they're thinking about 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what are those tariffs going to be? And I think the conclusion is they have no idea, but it's not going to be what the tariffs are today. So given that uncertainty, I just don't see the investment coming into the United States. So bottom line, I think we will see supply chains reorient, trading patterns will reorient, where people invest will reorient, and it'll be away from the United States. And that will be to the benefit of Asia. Countries like China, like India, I think will ultimately benefit from that redirection of investment and trade flows.
Right. Mark Linscott, speaking to you about the current negotiations. We've had one intense week of negotiations back in New Delhi. We now believe sectoral negotiations on the bilateral trade agreement will begin virtually. A talk between Howard Lutnick and Commerce Minister Goyal and Jamieson Greer is not off the table either. What is the sticking point, according to you? I know it's very difficult unless and until you're in the room, but from your experience, where do you think things are getting stuck right now in terms of tariff, or is it actually the non-tariff barriers which may be holding things up?
Yeah, well, let me start by responding for a moment. And I agree with Mark that there are really no winners out of this, that we need to buckle up. In fact, I suggest that this action is unprecedented in the modern age of trade, certainly since World War II. We have not had an action like this. It's much more reminiscent of what we saw between the world wars, which didn't end well. We had increased tariffs. We had retaliatory tariffs. We had a lot of bilateral agreements done, but there was economic chaos. So I just want to lay that out. That said, though, I do believe trade negotiations matter. Otherwise, virtually every country in the world wouldn't continue to negotiate with other countries to lower trade barriers. I mean, that's been a trend that's increased since the 90s. So it certainly is perceived as making a difference to negotiate on trade, to have preferential relationships. The bigger ambition is between the U.S. and India is a bilateral trade agreement. And while it's not being referred to as an FTA, as a free trade agreement, in substance, I think it's going to look a lot like that. And you don't do that overnight. You don't do that in a matter of weeks or a matter of months. There could be some early agreements on tariffs, but it won't cover the entire agenda. Certainly non-tariff barriers, rules areas like technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary issues, intellectual property rights, those take time. So a first tranche might be done by the fall when President Trump is expected to visit India. But negotiations are going to spill over into 2026, perhaps even into 2027, if the objective is a comprehensive agreement. And, you know, it would be a long list of issues that are blocking progress. I mean, this is going to take time, even if there might be the prospect for an interim agreement, which I would love to see.
Right. Mark, very quickly, could you list out the non-tariff barriers for us, Mark Linscott, that US is prioritizing in talks?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, there's this narrative that the license Raj essentially ended in the early 90s, and there was very substantial liberalization in the Indian market at that time, but it was not entirely eliminated. You know, particularly in the area of, I mean, there are sectors in which there are import bans. Of course, questions about legality under the WTO, but WTO is simply not relevant in this day and age, unfortunately. But that is the case. It pains me to say that, but it is the case. There are technical barriers to trade. There are requirements that certain India standards are being met, yet they do not align with international standards. Testing requirements that are limited to India, which are basically redundant when exporters from other countries, in fact, have tested to standards that assure quality, that assure protection of human life and human health. Those are in place, and often they appear to be in place because of protectionist objectives. There are a variety of issues in the agriculture sector, and frankly, on both sides. The U.S. has its own non-tariff barriers as well. But I think that's going to be a sector of focus, particularly because the agriculture sector, is being hit so hard as a result of these new tariffs. Foreign markets are closing up to U.S. agriculture. And that's why we even have Republican members of the Congress indicating that they are concerned about the implications for agriculture in foreign markets.
Right. We've completely run out of time, but I'd like to thank all our panelists, Suneeta, Reddy, Mark Linscott, Mark Zandi, for joining us for this very important discussion. It's a reciprocal tariff announcement that has really shaken the world and made sure that trade will now be the cornerstone or the foundation stone for any geopolitical alignments going forward. With that, it's a wrap on this special edition of Trump Watch. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.